Okay, Mary, you can start.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Birchfield Penny Art Center's Book Club at the Center. My name is Mary Kozub, and I'm so excited that you're joining us this evening, as tonight we have a very special presentation for you featuring Elaine Sciolino and her widely acclaimed book, Seine, River That Made Paris. This is a book that has been described as a love letter to Paris. For those of you joining our book club for the first time, I extend an especially warm welcome. Well, it seems there are more and more book clubs every day throughout our community. As you know, Buffalonians are very well read. I think you'll discover that ours is quite unique and very special. In addition to celebrating and supporting the extraordinary talents of the authors of this region, we have the distinct pleasure of always having the author with us as we explore their work, creating an opportunity for a uniquely rewarding experience and an intimate relationship with the book and with the author. While we once met at the center in the pre-COVID era, we are now exclusively online. During those times, sharing wine and chocolate brownies, those authors unable to be with us in person zoomed in from all over the world, just as it is tonight. For our author is zooming in from Paris itself. Very, very late hour for her, so I'm extending an extra big thank you to you, Elaine, for staying up so late to be here with us. Before we begin our romantic sail down the Seine, I want to turn things over to my colleague, Michaela Waros, who will explain the procedure for tonight's program. Michaela?
Hi, everyone. So I just want to start by saying that to use the webinar function, you can use the chat feature to reach out to anybody who's participating this evening, including the panelists. But if you have questions for the author, please use the Q&A section here at the bottom. I will also say that during the event, if all the panelists, whoever is not speaking, could mute themselves, that way we don't get feedback on this, that would be great. And we are recording this and going live to Facebook, but only the panelists are being recorded, just so everyone is aware. All right, I'll turn it over to Lori.
Well, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the book selection for this evening, The Seine, the River That Made Paris by Elaine Sciolino. And I will apologize in advance if I massacre any of the French pronunciations. Elaine has a very extensive CV, but I've just picked out a couple of highlights. She is a contributing writer and a former Paris bureau chief for the New York Times, based in France since 2002. She has the decorated Chevalier of the Legion of Honor for her special contributions between the countries of France and the United States. She is a member of the Executive Committee of Reporters Without Borders, and this group promotes freedom of information and freedom of the press. She has taught at Princeton University and is a member of their Italian and French departments. She has led New York Times tours to Iran and Provence. She joined the New York Times in 1984, and she has held several posts, including covering terrorism in Europe and the Iranian nuclear program. She was born in Buffalo, graduated from Canisius College, and received her master's in French history from New York University. She is one of the only American members of the Femme Forum, a Paris-based private club of 2,000 of the leading women of France. She currently lives in Paris with her husband. I chose to moderate this book in particular because my husband and I are actually Francophiles. We've traveled to France probably 5 or 6 times, and we were actually scheduled to take a river cruise of the Seine River in June for our 35th wedding anniversary. Unfortunately, due to COVID, that was canceled, which in a way, I'm glad that it gave me the opportunity to read this book first before taking that trip. I love the way Elaine laid out the book. Each chapter is like a new story of some aspect of the Seine, and it appealed to my organizational sense. She's a gifted writer and really knows how to pen a phrase. At this point, I would like to turn over the program to our author, Elaine Sciolino.
Well, bonsoir. It's evening here. It's after midnight from Paris. And thank you so much, Lori and Mary and Michaela. What a great team of women. I think it's absolutely wonderful. I was supposed to be in Buffalo this past spring for my Canisius College reunion, and I would have been there in person. And maybe one day I will come and we'll do a different kind of a Paris event face to face. But tonight you're with me in Paris, and I want to talk to you about a river, and not just any river, but the most romantic river in the world. And Michaela is going to help me with the slideshow. I usually do it myself, but I'm on a brand new computer, and this is my maiden Zoom voyage, and I didn't want to take the chance that I'd get lost along the way. So I'm working with my partner. So Michaela, you can put up the first slide if you'd like, and we'll take a look at this river. Okay, this is what the river looks like. It's 483 miles long, but if it were straight, it would be half that length. And because I'm from Buffalo and I'm from the West Side, I grew up on Busty Avenue, and we could see the Niagara River right outside our living room window. I decided to throw away the passage that I usually read when I open a talk on the Seine and read something about the Niagara. So I'm here with my book, and I'm just going to read a short paragraph to kind of put us in the mood of the Niagara and the Seine. People everywhere feel visceral connections with the rivers they love. Mark Twain had his Mississippi. Johann Strauss celebrated the Danube. Russians venerate the Volga. And Indianans sing about the Wabash. Many lovers of Broadway musicals know the words to Old Man River. In Buffalo, where I grew up, my river had been the Niagara, a short, fast-rolling strait between two lakes that does not look, move, or sound anything like the Seine. When I was 13, I took ballet lessons in Fort Erie, just across the river in Canada, and I often walked home on the pedestrian lane of the International Peace Bridge. No matter how cold the day, how fierce the snowstorm, I would stop midway across the span to gaze at the river below, abandoning myself to a force of nature beyond my control. Although the bridge was 18 miles away from the powerful Niagara Falls, the current already ran swift here. The Niagara taught me that a river can dissolve loneliness and catch the heart. So we're going now from the Niagara to the Seine. Let's look at the next slide. I want to show you where the Seine begins. It begins in the depths of Burgundy, and not the part of Burgundy that has the fancy wines, but the part of Burgundy where there are more cows than people. And it's interesting, those of you who know French will know that Ville de Paris means city of Paris, even though this source of the Seine is miles and miles away from Paris. But in the 19th century, Emperor Napoleon III decided he wanted to project the power of Paris throughout his domain, and he sent his urban planner, Baron Haussmann, to this remote part of the country to just declare this part of France Paris. So in the middle of nowhere in Burgundy, you have Paris. And those of you who know that Paris has 20 arrondissements, well, I kind of call this the 21st arrondissement. Let's look at the next slide. This is the first bridge over the Seine. You know, many of you who have been to Paris, you've seen all of those wonderful bridges, the density of them, that you feel like you can almost touch the water. Well, you certainly can touch the water from this bridge. And what many of you may not know is that the Seine sort of starts as tiny little springs that bubble up from below the surface, and it kind of has to be man-made into a channel to become a river. Now, here's a surprise for you with the next slide. In Gallo-Roman times, so 2,000 years ago, the source of the Seine was a place of healing dedicated to a healing goddess whose name was Sequana. And pilgrims came from as far as the Mediterranean and what's now the English Channel to worship, to stay, to consult with the pagan priests, and to throw offerings into that little oval pool that looks like a swimming pool to ask for Sequana's help in healing a body part. So if the pilgrim had a problem with his or her leg, he or she would drop a leg, maybe a wooden or a stone leg, into the pool. If it were some problem with the eyes, maybe an engraving of eyes would be thrown into the pool. And there was actually an excavation, and 1,500 of these offerings or ex votos were found, and now sit in a museum, the archaeological museum in Dijon. So let's look at the goddess. This is the goddess Sequana. It's a statue, a bronze statue that sits in the museum in Dijon. And I think she could be the most important female icon in France. And I fell so in love with this statue that I sweet talked the museum into taking her out of her glass case so we could photograph her. And I even entered her in a contest called Reinvent the Seine to try to build a replica of her the same size as the Statue of Liberty replica that sits in the Seine River. Because I thought, why should there be a replica of the Statue of Liberty that's a quarter size of the real Statue of Liberty in the Seine, and not the one for the healing goddess Sequana? I lost the, I shouldn't give it away, but I lost the contest. But, I may take up one of those crowdfunding projects, so that we can, if we earn enough money, we can build our own replica of her. And don't we need more healing in our lives these days? I certainly do. Also, the other thing about this goddess is that she, here's a great picture of her face, by the way. And I took this picture, and I think that she's gorgeous. She's kind of like the feminist Me Too ancient goddess, because according to one legend, she was playing by the sea, and Neptune, the sea god, came out from the sea and fell so in love with her that he tried to grab her and pull her into the sea with him. And this is what happened. When Neptune reached out his arms to seize her, her body melted into water. Her veil and green garments, which the winds blew before her, became emerald-colored waves. She was transformed into a river of that color, which still delights in wandering the places she loved as a nymph. So Sequana, the goddess Sequana, to save herself, turns herself into the Seine River. Now let's look at the next slide. And here is the Statue of Liberty sitting right in the middle of Paris on a little island near the Eiffel Tower. And she looks kind of lonely out there, doesn't she? Wouldn't it be nice if she had like Sequana to talk to all day? I mean, I think she would. Okay, next slide. This is the mighty Seine at a town called Châtillon. I mean, look at this. Can you believe this is a river? And she starts picking up more tributaries along the way, even tributaries that are bigger than she is, the Seine. But because she's a holy river, she should have lost her name and become another river, because when a tributary joins, two tributaries join, the one that's the bigger one gets the name. But because she had this sacred, holy, healing connection, she kept the name Sequana. Next slide. Now, this is Champagne country. Those of you who know France may have gone to Champagne country. Maybe you went to those fancy champagne places near Épernay or Reims, where you make your reservations months in advance and get all dressed up and sip tiny glasses of champagne while everybody gives you these very formal lectures. Well, there's a southern part of Champagne that's less fancy, and where you can actually just go knock on the door, and somebody will probably answer it with a lot of dogs and invite you in for a glass of champagne. And this is the only champagne domaine that is actually on the Seine River. So I have a chapter called Champagne on the Seine. And let's look at the next slide, because I want to introduce you to Monsieur Fleury, who's a fourth generation grape grower and champagne maker. And he does all that kind of Steiner method stuff with the moon and crystals and things, and only cuts his grapes certain times of the month and all that. And he and his wife run what's called a gîte, which is a kind of, it's kind of like a hotel, but it's kind of like a bed and breakfast hotel where it's very down to earth. So they have like one kitchen and one bathroom for 25 people, but it's quite wonderful. And it sits on the Seine River. And I actually went swimming in the Seine River in front of his property. So the Seine in certain parts of France can be swimmable. It's that clean. Next slide. And here is a picture I love. My younger daughter, Gabriella, took this photograph. I love it because it shows just how quiet and still the Seine is. Boy, this is not the Niagara, is it? It's like a mirror. It moves so slowly as the Seine moves towards Paris. And you can see it. It's really very wild. It's kind of it's the countryside, and you can also see why it inspired so many painters. And now we're going to move to Paris. Let's go to the next slide. And this is the coat of arms of Paris. And what is it? It's a boat on the Seine River. And there's a motto of the city of Paris, and I don't know if you can all read it. It's Fluctuat nec mergitur in Latin. Now, when I went to Holy Angels Academy, we had to study Latin for at least 2 years. So I don't know if there's any Latin expert in our midst, but if there is, does anybody know what that means? Fluctuat nec mergitur. If you can guess it, you get a little prize. Anybody dare guess? The Grey Nuns of the Sacred Heart and the Jesuits don't teach Latin in Buffalo anymore. Que vergogna, as my Sicilian grandfather would say. Okay, we have nobody is guessing here. Maybe you're just all so shy, or maybe you're so exhausted because we don't have a result of it. Wait a second, wait, we've got one. She is tossed by the waves but does not sink. Oh my gosh, Patricia McMillan got this. I hope, Patricia, you did not look this up on the internet and you remembered this from Latin, but I'm going to trust that you remembered it from Latin, and you're going to get a frame-ready illustrated map of the Seine River that you just have to send me your address. Bravo, that's good. Now, this motto, you can find it, thank you, she says, okay. She didn't say whether she cheated or not, but that's okay. You didn't cheat, did you, Patricia? I hope you didn't. Where did you learn your Latin? This coat of arms and this motto is everywhere in Paris. You'll see it on bridges. You'll see it on the sides of park benches. You'll see it in metro stations. You'll even see it on my Hermes scarf. See? Which I got at the flea market here. And when Paris opens up again, you can all come to the Hermes. Those of you who are Hermes scarf fans, I'll tell you where to get a great Hermes scarf. And let's look at the next slide, because I want to show you where else it has been. When, Michaela, let's go to the next slide. When Paris was struck in 2015 by terrorist attacks in November 13th, 2015, and the Bataclan concert hall, a sports stadium, some bars and restaurants were hit. The city of Paris decided to fight back with the motto "Fluctuat nec mergitur," and as you can see, the seals of the city of Paris. And I think that in confinement, you know, those of you who know follow French news will know that we are now under lockdown again and have very strict rules about even going out, and have to work from home unless it's absolutely necessary. So I think this is the best motto for our times, and maybe even our times, maybe even our times around the world, tossed by the waves, but does not sink. I think it's probably a good motto for us in the United States as well. Okay, let's go to our next slide. So what do we have here? We have a bouquiniste, Jackie Galois, who sells books along the Seine. This is one of the most fun things to do in Paris because you don't even have to know French. You just can pretend you belong and look at fancy old books and act smarter than you are. At least I'll speak for myself. That's what I do. So I just want to read a very, very short passage from the book that kind of sums up how life is lived on the river. You can live, eat and drink, make love, get married, practice yoga, run a business, shop for books, watch fireworks, do a wine tasting, go fishing, dance the tango. You can attend a fashion show, a concert, a play. You can find a hotel, a psychiatric hospital ward, a film studio, a homeless shelter, an architect's showroom, all floating on the river. Now, Michaela, we have several slides that will show this, so let's go. Next slide. Okay, sunbathing on the Seine. Every summer the mayor turns the banks of the Seine into a beach, and they even put up palm trees, and they used to truck in sand. Next, Michaela, next slide. Ooh, salsa dancing on the Seine. You can even have free salsa lessons on the Seine. Next slide. Fishing. You can get a one-day permit and go fishing on the Seine. Next slide. Canoeing. These boats are 100-year-old boats, and they are restored by an organization called the Sequana Association, and they actually have the original boats of the artist Caillebotte and the writer Maupassant. Next slide. This is one of my favorite photographs. It's actually someone diving off a 12-meter diving board on the Alexander III Bridge. When the mayor of Paris was angling to get the 2024 Olympics in Paris, she did this great show and tell for a whole weekend. And she asked the Olympic diving team to come and dive off the diving board into the Seine. And I went and interviewed this kid after he came out of the water, and I said, "So what was it like?" And he said, "Well, it's kind of dark, and I didn't know if I'd hit my head on the bottom, but I think with a 20-minute shower, hot water, I think I might live." So, next slide. Romance on the Seine. Okay, so here's Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone and the whole movie in La La Land. It's all in California. And then suddenly they're dancing, and suddenly they're in Paris dancing along the Seine, because where is the most romantic place to dance except on the Seine, right? Because Paris is the city of romance. And one of my friends, actually, it's my friend Barbara Ireland, who some of you may know. She lives in Buffalo, and she used to be a big cheese at both the New York Times and the Buffalo News. She's a close friend. She said to me, "Elaine, you can't write a book about the Seine and Paris without having a chapter about sex." And I said, "Barbara, you can't have sex on the Seine. I mean, where are you going to have sex? Under a bridge? It's dirty, it's dark, it's damp, it could be dangerous. There are 2 million human inhabitants of Paris. There are 4 million ratatouille inhabitants of Paris. You really don't want to do this." But what Lori didn't say is one of my jobs at the New York Times was I had to cover the CIA. I hated the job, but it taught me investigative reporting. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to have to investigate sex on the Seine. And what I discovered is that one year, a Chinese fireworks artist did a fireworks show on the Seine that was called One Night Stand, the ultimate Paris sex fantasy. And with your permission, I'd like to just read a little bit from this chapter on sex on the Seine. One Night Stand opened at midnight with the sounds of sex. It was heavy breathing, gasping, and moaning broadcast across the river by loudspeaker. Rhythmic drumming and a monkey's mating call added auditory texture. Next, a pyrotechnic display sent fireworks into the air. The act lasted 12 minutes, estimated to be the length of time the average French couple needs to climax. Then, the artist transformed a bateau mouche tourist boat into a love boat, where 50 couples from around the world had sex inside translucent red tents. The couples were given the option of either turning off the lights in their tents to copulate privately or turning them on to reveal their silhouettes in motion. To share the bliss with the crowd, the lovers could press a button signaling operators in small boats nearby to send a 15-second spurt of bright white fireworks into the air. Michaela, could you show us the next slide, please? There it is. And the next slide, please. One Night Stand. And you can believe it, I mean, only in Paris.
Yeah.
The mayor was there watching this because, of course, the city of Paris paid for this whole thing. You know. Okay, so now, what comes next? Next we have some serious business because, you know, I know that I've probably broken all the rules because the Birchfield Penny Center is very serious, and I've gone off course, but that's okay. We want to keep everybody awake because I know you've lost sleep waiting to see who our next president is. So now we've got you awake. So now we'll go into some boring art because this is your center's all about art. Okay, who can tell me? You can get the prize if you get this. Who paint? You have to either say, tell me who painted this, or what is the name of the painting? Who knows the answer?
How do I get in here?
How do I get in here is not the name of the
No,
painting.
it's Renoir, and it's the luncheon of the boating party.
Renoir. Well, you know what? Lori and Nancy got it. Lori got the title, luncheon of the boating party, and Nancy got Renoir. So you both get a prize. So we have two winners. That's great. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, they'll get harder along the way. Next one. Next slide. Who knows who painted this painting? You can see this the bridge out the window. Matisse, Sandra. Okay, we've got a winner, another winner. This is a good group. Okay, next one. It's going to get harder now. (1937). There's a bridge. It's Paris. There's a very famous building in the background. Anybody? Anybody know what bridge it is? Anybody want to take a guess what bridge it is or what building that is back there?
Is it the Louvre in the background?
Good guess, but no cigar. Nope. No, Sandra got it again. Oh, Sandra, I have to tell you, you can't win twice. I'm sorry. I should have told you. You should have put a fake name up. But you know what? I'll send you a little. There's Sequana. If you decide to, you want to you can just use it as a bookmark. But if you buy my book, you can stick it on as a book plate. So we'll send that in there too. Okay, next one. This is the last one. Anybody know this one?
Is it Ellsworth Kelly?
Oh my God, Ellsworth Kelly. Lori, no one has ever gotten this. This is really quite extraordinary. Bravo. Ellsworth Kelly came to Paris on the GI Bill, 1951. He painted this. He looked at the Seine, and this is what he saw. He saw the light and the movement of the water, and it inspired him. Wow, this is a good group. My gosh, I'm gonna have to find even harder paintings than this. But you know what? Since we're talking about paintings, I just want to tell you a story about my mother. You know, my mother was a painter, amateur painter. She was a stay-at-home mom, but she painted. And when we were little kids, she used to take us to the Albright Knox art gallery. And Lori, I know that for many years you were at the Albright Knox. And I originally had a whole chapter about the Niagara River and about Buffalo in the book, and I had to cut it out. But I went and found a paragraph that I had written about my mother and the Albright Knox that I'm going to read before we move on. She loved the French Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, and we would linger in front of paintings that took her into Paris and along the Seine. We studied Henri Matisse's muted A Glimpse of Notre Dame in the late afternoon, Claude Monet's snowy towpath at Argenteuil, winter, just west of Paris, and Eugène Boudin's The Seine at Rouen, painted in what seems like 100 shades of brown and gray. So everybody, you have the Seine right in Buffalo, New York, just right across the street from where you are right now. I mean, I know the gallery is in restoration and all that, but somewhere in its depths, there are these three paintings. Okay, let's move on. Oh, okay, what is this? I put this in for all the Italians who are with us today. This is a replica, a miniature replica of the boat that Verrazzano sailed to New York in 1524. It took him 50 days, and he started with 4 boats, and only one made it. And we're in Rouen en route to the sea, and this group in Rouen is trying to raise enough money to build a replica. The next slide. This is a windmill in the middle of nowhere in Normandy, a 12th century windmill. And I went one day, I was all by myself, and I wanted to go in and go up to the top of it, but there were all of these birds flying around, and it was kind of really weird. And I went in and I talked to the guy, and I said, "Did you ever see the birds?" And he said, "Huh?" And I said, "Les oiseaux?" And he goes, "Huh?" I said, "Alfred Hitchcock?" He said, "Ah." He said, "Okay, if you go up to the top and you don't come down in 20 minutes, I'll come looking for you." So I used to be a war correspondent. You know, I've been shelled in Lebanon and shot at in Baghdad, and you know, gone through minefields in Iran, but the birds, you know, force of nature was just a little too much, but I'm here to tell you that I was brave and I did it. Next slide. This is the last bridge over the Seine. We're in Le Havre now as the Seine moves into the sea. And I love this photograph. It's quite different from where our first little stone bridge at the beginning, isn't it? Okay, now I want to move you back to Paris. Michaela, let's move us back to Paris. And this is one of my favorite photographs. It's the Pont de la Tournelle, and it's the back of Notre Dame. It's not a view of Notre Dame that we see very much. And I love this going onto this bridge and watching the sun come up, because the back of Notre Dame turns a wonderful orange. And I want to end my the formal part of my presentation talking about Notre Dame. My book was written, it was in print, it had already been sent out to reviewers, to fact checkers, when Notre Dame burst into flames on April 15th of last year. And I happened to have been in New York then, and my husband was in Paris, and he called me and said, "There is a fireboat right at the banks of the Seine, on the banks of the Seine, right near Notre Dame. And I think you may have to look into this. And I realized that the Seine played a role in putting out the fire. So when I looked into it, I discovered that the water supply and the water pressure on the Ile de la Cité, the island on which Notre Dame sits, was too weak to pump enough water to put out the fire. So the firefighters had to take a boat all the way from the Marne River through those curves that you saw in when I showed you the map early on, through a lock. Any of you who have been to those locks on the Erie Canal know how long it can take to get through a lock, until it could come right in front of the Notre Dame Cathedral on the banks, hook up to fire hoses, and start pumping water to put out the fire. And this is how I end the book. The Ile-de-France, the powerful floating station moored 7 miles upstream, furiously pumped water from the depths of the river. By the time the fire was extinguished hours later, the city's firefighting force estimated that half the water used in the operation had come from the Seine. General Jean-Claude Gallet, the commander of the firefighters, said, "We had before us two elements of nature, fire and water. The fire had the face of a demon with a mind of its own. Then right in front of us, we had the Seine. It was as if the Seine were human. It all sounds a bit mystical, but the water of the Seine saved Notre Dame." His spokesman called it a miracle. I grew up Catholic, and I would never dare to contradict those who believe that God answered their prayers in saving Notre Dame. But I also have come to believe in the spiritual as well as the physical power of the Seine. Even before the ancient Romans conquered Gaul, its source had been the site of a temple of healing and a place of pilgrimage dedicated to Sequana. Notre Dame will be rebuilt, different perhaps, but with its primal place in French life and its symbolic meaning for the world intact. It will be reborn as a vibrant place of music, ritual, and prayer for believers, and a beautiful museum for the masses. The holy waters of the river that once bore the name Sequana saved the greatest cathedral in the world. I want to believe that the spirit of the goddess herself lives on. Michaela, can you show us the last slide? And here is the fireboat and the firefighters. And there you can see one of the hoses pumping water to put out the fire. And that's it. Voila. There's one more slide. We don't have to have it, but it's since we got Lori back on, we won't show the last slide unless we are going to show the last slide. Okay, let's end. And there is the frame-ready illustrated map done by a wonderful American artist who lives in Paris named Carol Gillot. She has a site called Paris Breakfast. Doesn't that put you in the mood to want to come to Paris? Huh?
Absolutely.
Okay, over to you, Lori.
There's never a bad time for Paris, in my opinion. I just had a couple of questions, and others, if they want to chime in with questions, being respectful of your time and the lateness of the hour.
Now I'm revved up, you know. I mean, I could.
I was interested in if you could comment on houseboat life on the Seine and barge life, and are they still a part of life on the Seine River?
Oh, very much so. You know, I get horribly seasick even sitting on a houseboat with the very gentle waves of the Seine. But I went out there. I was brave. I went out on houseboats and barges, and it's become a chic way to live on a houseboat, and it's almost more expensive to buy your parking place for your boat in Paris than it is to buy the boat itself. But there are all sorts of different kinds of boat, from old military boats to old barges that have been turned into places to live. And as for barges, yes, the Seine is still very much a working river. And although barge life has been transformed, and it's both easier in the sense that you've got GPS and you've got a lot of modern technological advancements that make it less dangerous, because you're less likely to hit a sandbar because you've got something that can tell you the depths of the water. But it's a really hard life and a hard way to make a living.
I think there's another question that just came through.
You're going to have to read it, because
Let's
bounced
see if
it bounced off my screen.
Yeah, for some reason I cannot get the Q&A. Maybe Michaela can get that up. The question.
There are no Q&A questions right now, so you can keep going with your questions, Lori.
All right. You also had a section in the book about the lighting of the structures along the Seine in Paris, the Paris school versus the Lyon school. And I was interested if you could comment on that. I didn't even really think about it, or was aware that there was different ways of lighting the structures.
I didn't know it either until I did a story years ago for the travel section of the New York Times on Paris at night. And to do the story, I went along, I spent a night with the chief lighting engineer for the city of Paris. If you can believe it, the city of Paris has a whole lighting department, dozens of engineers who think up interesting ways to light all of the public buildings of the city. That's one of the reasons it looks so beautiful. It's kind of like putting necklaces and bracelets and earrings on all of the buildings and making them transforming very banal looking buildings and bridges into works of art. And what I realized is that if there are, as you said, there's two different schools. There's a school of very flat, even lighting across the front, and that's called the Paris School. And then there is a sort of pointillistic approach where you have little tiny lights throughout the structure that enhance all of the details, this architectural and design details, to make it look kind of like a medieval castle. Like City Hall, the Paris, the Hotel de Ville is the Lyon School, where something like the Conciergerie, the former prison, looks just flat and has an even light. But it's a very interesting and creative way to look at public space.
Mm-hmm. I had another question. In your book, you, towards the end, talk about the role of the Seine River during World War II. In particular, you focused on the section between Paris and Normandy. Were other areas of the Seine also important during the war?
It was mostly the from Normandy to Paris, because the Seine was crucial after the D-Day and after the Allied invasion, because the Allies had to get from Normandy to Paris. I thought I knew a little bit about World War II. You read about the D-Day and what they call the débarquement, the landings. And then you read, okay, de Gaulle is suddenly in Paris and Paris is liberated. But what happened in between? The soldiers had to get from Normandy to Paris, and it was quite dramatic as they were pushing the Germans out. And they both bombed bridges, but then built these Bailey bridges, temporary bridges, so that they could make up for the fact that there were no permanent bridges. And it took quite a creative military strategy to get from Normandy to Paris.
Okay. I also had a question. This is not entirely related to your book about how difficult was you, this is more towards the beginning of your book, how difficult was it to move to Paris and ingratiate yourself with the French?
It was very difficult. In fact, I don't know if any of you have seen Emily in Paris, the Netflix series. I actually wrote a story for the New York Times about my own experience coming to Paris. Emily in the series comes from Chicago and comes to Paris. Of course, she's thinner than any woman I've ever met in Chicago, and she looks more French than American, and she immediately is wearing French clothes, so she didn't look at all like me when I moved from Chicago to Paris. But I moved to Paris when I was in my 20s the first time, with no sources, no friends, no lovers, no, very mediocre French, and it was really hard. And what I write, and also, I had, this is more information than you need to know, but it's the first page of my book. I had a husband in Chicago. I had been married when I was very young, and one day he came home and said he didn't want to be married anymore. And so I gave him half of everything, and then 4 months later he was remarried, and I was off to Paris, and voila. What helped me was the beauty of Paris and the Seine River, because I would walk home every day, and I would walk over this one bridge and stand in the middle of the river and look at the sun setting behind Notre Dame, behind the Eiffel Tower, and I would say, you know what, it's going to be okay. And it was okay. I mean, Paris is a cliche, but boy, Paris delivers.
It's a big leap of faith on your part. And when you mentioned Emily in Paris, that was actually written up in one of our publications with the Buffalo News, and it's on my to-do list. I just have one final question. I don't know if anybody else in the audience has any, about terrorism in Europe, and because that's part of some of the writing that you've done in the past, particular in France. And recent days in Nice, they had the beheading. Vienna, Austria, but that sounds like that was an anti-Semitic event. What do you see as the issues coming to play there in France?
We should have another session just on terrorism. I was the correspondent responsible for covering terrorism in Europe for a while, and covered terrorist attacks in Casablanca, Madrid, London, Paris. Obviously, September 11th, I was in Washington then went to the Pentagon that day. There are a lot of different and complicated reasons why terrorism has been such a scourge in a country like Paris. Part of it is the legacy of colonialism, which means that there are huge swaths of a population that is Muslim. France has more Muslims per capita than any other country in Europe. It also has more Jews than any other per capita than any other country in Europe. And assimilation has not worked the way it should. In part, I feel, although this is very controversial, because unlike America, where we celebrate multiculturalism and we celebrate our backgrounds, and we talk about, ourselves in terms of, I'm a Catholic, or, oh, I'm a Jew, or, I'm Italian, or I still tell people, je suis un issu de l'immigration. I am a product of immigration, In France, there is an idealization of this perfect French person, and you don't ever deal with ethnicity or race or religion. They don't even ask on a census what your race, religion, or ethnicity is. You're supposed to conform to this French ideal. But in real life, it doesn't exist. It doesn't work that way. If you're Muslim, or if you have an Arab last name, or you're Black, try to rent an apartment in many neighborhoods of Paris. Try to go to a good school. If you look at a picture of the cabinet, there are a lot of women now in the cabinet, but it's all white. And so France has not done a very good job of assimilating its immigrant population. The terrorist attack, the recent terrorist, the beheading of a school teacher was an anomaly because it was an outsider. It was a Chechen Muslim who didn't have anything to do with France, who came and killed him because he dared to show caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad to school children. Now you can question his judgment. Should he have shown, a very vulgar image of a religious figure to 13-year-olds? But the horror of somebody coming in from the outside and beheading a teacher because he dared to express, have freedom of expression is beyond anything that we can possibly comprehend. I'm constantly adjusting why France is so touched by terrorism. And part of it is that France projects its power throughout the world. It has a very active military in places like Mali. It really works against in a way that even the United States in this administration has not done. It continues to try to fight ISIS and Al Qaeda with troops on the ground, and so there are repercussions if it projects its power like this. So it's a complicated, deeply phenomenon that is going to be with us, and unfortunately, it's in Europe more than it is. Unfortunately for us, than in the United States. In the United States, since September 11th, there really has not been this kind of, it's been a different kind of terrorism. It's right wing or left wing, but not religious based.
There's another question from one of our audience. Kate is asking, are you in Paris to stay or?
Am I in Paris to stay? Let's see. It depends on what happens with the United States and whether or not we continue to be a democracy or not. No, I'm joking. I came here this time with my husband and my two kids in 2002. My kids went to one went to middle school and high school. They both went to middle school and high school, and here they're both in the U.S. now. One's 30, one's 31. If I'm ever a grandmother, maybe I'll want to move back to the United States. We still have a house in Washington. But my husband moved here for my job. He's a lawyer, and he got a good job here at a law firm with a French team. And he had to take the French bar, so he had to memorize, learn the Napoleonic Code and take oral and written exams in French. And he speaks with a French accent. He wears French cuffs. Sometimes I think he thinks he's French. I think for now we're here, and this is home.
So we do have sorry, Lori, I'm gonna take over the Q&A. So we have a handful of questions here. So first is Patricia. She says, I was taken when reading the book by how well you gave voice to the Seine's many personalities. Which of them do you love most?
I love that's a really good question. Well, the Seine is a she, obviously. I love the intimacy that you have with the Seine when you come to Paris and you're standing on those bridges and you're so close to the river, you feel as if you can touch the water. And you can even, in some of the bridges, you can walk down the stairs and go on the lower level and be very close to the water. And, you don't have that kind of feeling when you're on the Peace Bridge. I mean, those of you who know the Peace Bridge, you're way, way up high, and you have to go all the way to, what's the name of the park near Niagara Falls where they have the islands and all that. You have to walk through the park to get close to the Niagara and to feel that same intimacy. The Niagara Falls Reservation Park. Thank you very much, Paula.
All right, our next question from Nancy is, what is ratatouille? She says you referred to it earlier and she doesn't know what it is.
You know what? I was trying to be elegant. I mean, Ratatouille is the movie about the rats, you know, and the you know, the rat that wanted to be the chef. You know, anybody can cook. And so I was trying to say that there are 2 million people living in Paris and there are 4 million rats living in Paris. But you know, I wanted to be like eloquent and elegant among such a refined group as Birchfield Penny. You know.
All right. Cheryl says, on page 4, you said, quote, "Oh, the movies of Paris." Which movies do you recommend?
Which movies do I recommend? Oh my gosh, I have a whole chapter on movies. Oh my goodness. Well, you start with An American in Paris, which was the 1950s, and you know, Leslie Caron and Gene Kelly, and you move through Emily in Paris, which isn't a movie; it's a 10-part series, and the first episode is really terrible and cringeworthy, according to one of my daughters. But Paris looks beautiful and looks pretty, and it's clean, and there aren't any beggars or homeless or metros or rats or garbage. It's just prettified museum Paris, like in your imagination. And it's just what we need in this time of tragedy and illness and insecurity. Oh gosh, there's been hundreds of movies done about Paris. I loved Midnight in Paris, although you know, you can't say anything good about Woody Allen, but the cinematographer for Midnight in Paris, Darius Khondji, was brilliant. And the first 5 minutes is just different scenes of Paris. And at the end of those 5 minutes of watching his beautiful cinematography, you just want to get on a plane and go to Paris.
So from
Funny
Laura,
Face, Audrey Hepburn, good grief. Audrey Hepburn and Funny Face. What about Charade? You know, Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant and on the bateau mouche on the Seine. I mean, who doesn't want to go on a bateau mouche and tourist boat at night and meet Cary Grant?
Laura has a question. She says, in the book you mentioned Nuit Blanche and that it traditionally takes place in October. She's wondering if there's anywhere you can recommend to find more information about it, or if you have information about it.
Oh, it's Nuit Blanche, and what it means is white night, or a night where you stay up all night. And one night every year, the city of Paris stays up all night, and there are musical events and cultural events throughout the city. That's when our fireworks artist did his one night stand. I mean, with confinement this year, there was not really a Nuit Blanche, but it's an all-night celebration. If you look it up, Nuit, N-U-I-T, which means night, and Blanche, which means white, you'll see all the different events that have taken place over time. And maybe by next October, there will be one, and you can come.
Danielle asks, how are the residents of Paris doing this year, 2020, with COVID? Has it hampered their spirits much?
Yes. Parisians tend to be, and the French in general, tend to be more pessimistic than optimistic. And it's been tough. You know, in March, we had a very, very severe confinement where you could not leave your apartment or home for more than an hour and go more than a kilometer away from your permanent residence. And you had to carry a formal statement signed with your date of birth, your address, the date, the time, and a reason checked off about why you were out on the street. What we did in our courtyard is one of the women from the building set up a gym class in the courtyard, and we all got very fit, doing an hour and 15 minutes of gym every day. Then things got a little easier, but now we're under confinement again. We're under we're under a lockdown. And, you know, again, if I go out, if I leave my apartment, I've got to go out with a signed piece of paper saying, why am I leaving? It has to be like for a doctor's appointment or a lawyer's appointment or work that can only be done in person, like factory work. Restaurants are closed. They've closed the museums again. All public shops except essential shops like for food or farm, you know, supermarkets, pharmacies, hardware stores are closed. And so it's a very strange way to live. And my husband is working at home, so you know I work at home, but luckily I like him, so it's okay.
Joanne asks, what do you see as the future of barge travel for tourists immediately after this COVID pandemic? The ride, especially at night, is truly beautiful and romantic.
Well, there is barge tourism, not on the Seine, but I think on the Rhone and in the canals, and there are barges that have been turned into hotels, and they're very beautiful. And on the Seine, there are wonderful fancy tours. In fact, I took one of them, with very, very fancy food and chandeliers and crystal chandeliers and brass fittings, and you feel like a queen. And so that's one, barge or tourism boats or one thing that where you actually live on the boat. And then there are tourist boats that you go on a tourist boat along the Seine in Paris for an hour or two at night. And that's a wonderful thing that everybody should do. Everybody should take a ride on the Seine at night in Paris. At night, it's just one of those magical, wonderful things to do.
Sandra asks, I read somewhere that Paris is planning to clean up the Seine to make it swimmable as it was 100 years ago. Is that true?
Yes, it is true. The mayor she has this plan to make the Seine swimmable by 2024 when you're going to have the Paris Olympics, or the Summer Olympics in Paris. And in the beginning, when the Seine is small, before you really get to cities, it's very clean. It's a spring, it's a natural. I drank the water from the Seine at the source of the Seine. I swam in the Seine, as I said earlier. It's only when you start getting into city life that the Seine gets dirty. Why does it get dirty? It gets dirty because of industrial runoff, because houseboat owners, barge owners dump stuff into the Seine. Their boats leak oil. It's because lead roofs, the runoff from lead roofs ends up going through the sewers and the sidewalks and ends up in the Seine, so that it's polluted by the time you get to Paris. But the Seine is a lot cleaner than it used to be. About 20 years ago, there were only 4 species of fish in the Seine, and now there's about 30. And during confinement, when we had lockdown and there were no tourist boats on the Seine, there were no houseboats on the Seine, nobody could move, the Seine in Paris got so clean that in some parts you could see to the bottom.
Janice has our last question. So she asks, what is the mood of Paris re the presidential election?
I have to be very honest. The French do not understand how. I mean, this is going to be a hard question to answer, and I'm going to be very blunt, and I hope I don't offend people who, voted for our president to have a second term, but the French really do not understand how America could have voted for President Trump and why he would even be in the running to be reelected. And it's both a moral basis and on an international basis. The current administration is not internationalist. It doesn't believe in the importance of alliances. I used to be the diplomatic correspondent for the New York Times, and it was very different under other administrations, even Republican or Democratic administrations, where you valued your allies, you valued your the NATO alliance. If you made a pact with a country, if you made an agreement, you held to your word. So the French, who were part of the Iran nuclear accord, the 2015 nuclear accord, which set back Iran's nuclear program by 15 years, could not understand that the United States just broke its word. So on the international level, there is a real feeling that the United States has turned its back to its international responsibilities. On a human level, there is not an understanding that we could have, that we as a country, that we as a people could choose someone who the French would consider dishonest. And I'm not saying that the French are morally correct, but the notion that whether it's with bullying or not telling the truth or not paying taxes, again, this is what the French would say, there is an incomprehension. And I can't even go out on the street in my neighborhood. I wrote a whole book on the Rue des Martyrs, and I go on the street to buy the fish. I went out yesterday. I went to the fishmongers. All they wanted to do was talk about what's going on with the election. Then I go to the cheese store, and the couple that runs the cheese store, that's all they wanted to talk to. Then I went and bought my newspaper, and it's the same thing. The French are obsessed by this election and are as probably as interested in the outcome as all of us are today.
So that was our last question. Is there anybody else that has a question, can pop it in the Q&A? Otherwise, we can, unless Lori has questions, if Mary has questions, we can turn it over to them.
Well, I would just like to thank Elaine for being up at this late hour and putting on such a great discussion. We really appreciate this. I'll welcome you back to Buffalo should you ever have the opportunity to come back, see all the changes in the city, and appreciate your honest appraisal of the situation over in Europe and France and Paris in particular, and just hope that you stay well.
Well, it's very kind, and I hope all of you do as well. And I will be back. I mean, I know that we will have a reunion someday at Canisius, and I will be back. And I mean, poor Holy Angels Academy is no longer with us, so I can't go to another reunion there. But the last time I was in Buffalo, I even took a tour of the Buffalo River, and so saw how that river has come alive from my childhood. And saw what happened at the front park near the Peace Bridge, that it's all being turned back to the way it was when Olmsted designed it. And so so yeah, invite me back, and I know I'm yours. You'll have to take me out for a fancy dinner, or at least a beef on weck. But I'm there, and thank you all for having me. I love Buffalo, and
Elaine, thank you.
Proud of what you do.
Thank you for an extraordinary evening. And I want to thank Michaela and Lori for their help. And thank you, everyone out there, for staying with us all night. So they really enjoyed meeting you, because everybody's still online with you. And I invite you back next month on December 3rd, which promises to be a very lively event, as activist and the leader of the downsizing movement, Kevin Gaughan, will be joining us with his book, At First Light, Strengthening Buffalo Niagara in the New Century. He's also the visionary behind the plan to bring Jack Nicholson designed golf courses to our region. But before we go, Elaine, thank you. And I urge all of you to buy her book. It's available at Barnes & Noble and at Amazon in paperback, hard copy. It's also on Audible. My daughter is getting one for her birthday. I love the book. I read every single luscious word of it, and now I cannot wait to return to Paris.
Oh.
Please read it. Thank you so much, Elaine. It was just a perfect evening. I hope you had as much fun as I did.
I had a blast, and I'll see you in Paris, Mary.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. And thanks, Lori, thanks, Michaela, and thank all of our guests.
Bye-bye.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good night.